So now I'd like to bring up Ben Smith. Ben is a partner who has joined us about a year and a half ago. So Ben has a fantastic track record. He started with us in the mid-90s, 95, I think, left in about 2003 as a partner, went on to join the Department of Transportation, has founded 3 companies, and then since rejoining us, has brought a ton of energy to helping us create the sense of culture that we want on the West Coast, and also to help build the high-tech practice. So with that, Ben is going to facilitate the alumni panel. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. So I was an alumni of the firm for longer than I've worked for the firm. I've been a client of the firm, I've been an advisor to the firm, and throughout that entire time, my relationship with individuals of the firm shaped me. There is not a month gone by where I haven't had a discussion with Bob Duffy. I have argued with Joe Rodabaugh about things for years. There are some people in this room who are at my second bachelor party. There are a number of people who know both my wives. So I've always felt that alumni and connections and networking was important, not because you were going to sell something to someone, a word that a number of people who work for me know I don't like to use, but because you learn something from other people. Because of that, I wanted to put a group of people together, some of which are my former partners who stewarded the firm with me back in the 90s, and some of which are younger people who I didn't know, and have them join us. Allison Davis was one of the 2 partners who led San Francisco when I first joined the firm, with her husband, Matthew Lemurl. After she left the firm, was CFO of BGI, which of course became BlackRock. Then she was in private equity and buying banks, both as an investor and now as a public company board member of a number of public companies. She's an amazing person. She also sets the standard on apprenticeship, given that 2 of her kids work for the firm. And for most of the young people in the room, you'll know one of them, Tallulah, who's a force of nature. Next, Joe. Joe was with the firm as a partner back in the 90s as well. He then went to be an executive at EDS, HP, EMC, and he's now been the CEO of Earthlink and the CEO of a local company here that's well, it's not local, it's a global company. That has a couple of Kearney alumni working for him. Just a couple of partners who you guys have both worked with, who we all worked with, Jim Lagas, Bob Duffy, Dale Marco, who helped shape you guys as well as me. And next, Flavi, who was one of the rare people who've ever hired in the firm who was a PhD candidate, was in the Boston office, worked in a lot of healthcare. The project she said she appreciated the most is the one where, as a vegetarian, she learned the difference between bacon and ham, which was very useful later. And Carol Kroshank, I think, was a big shaper of your career.
And Mike Weiss.
And Mike Weiss, who's here.
Yeah.
Brian has been an operating executive for a private equity firm for a long time, has run 3 companies, one of which he took public, and has also been a client of the firm. When I asked him about his favorite engagements, he listed like 8 or something, but had to say EDS was his favorite with Marcy.
Shout out to David and Marcy. Yeah.
Yep. And Marcy taught him a little about how to deal with difficult clients and difficult teams. I think that was probably referring to a Kearney team.
Difficult partners.
Yes.
That's right.
A lot of good, Kubach, Duffy, there was a lot of good partners on that job. And Fedor. Now I'm saying it wrong. I practiced it right.
It's close.
A bunch of times. Who's head of strategy at Shiseido, personal care company. And his favorite engagement is a DHL turnaround, in spite of the fact that he was working for Laurent. No, he actually says, it's in writing, that he was most influenced by Laurent's clarity and structure. Believe that or not, Laurent. And Sean Ryan's mentoring and caring about people. Out of all that experience at Kearney, what did you take away that actually shaped your ability to be a leader afterwards?
There's some typical things outside being an efficient traveler that I learned at Kearney that I've taken with me wherever I've gone is strong analytical skills, but I would say there's a difference between just being a good analyst and being pragmatic about it. And Kearney's always been operationally oriented in its nature, and so the problem solving that came was very operational and very outcome driven. So when I was in the firm in Allison and when Ben was here the first time, Steingraber's commitment to excellence, exceeding expectations, delivering outcomes has always stuck with me. And that's an aspect of client service is you serve your client to make a difference and you make an impact.
when you left A.T. Kearney and first jumped into an executive role, what do you wish you had known when you were a consultant?
Good question. There's a couple things coming to my mind. When you cross that line, and then you end up in leadership roles, people, management skills, leadership skills, the softer skills that it's hard to get in small consulting teams, is a critical skill that I ask you all to continue to develop in yourselves. So how do you communicate to large groups? How do you communicate effectively? How do you get your message across? How do you get it across in a way that wants people to follow your direction? Learn from your clients. That sometimes it's easy as a consulting to think that you're solving a problem, maybe they're not keeping up with you. They might actually be one step ahead. And so keep that in mind, that humility in mind about what you're doing and what you're working on.
I think when you're a consultant, you focus on this problem with the client, and you're there and you're going to do the best analytical work, and it's going to be pragmatic, and you're going to get stuff done, and you think you've conquered the mountain. And really the work the work really starts once you're done with that. And that comes with bringing the organization along, being able to communicate the message and everything you were saying, because that's when the real work starts, and I don't think you fully appreciate that in the consulting environment.
Just learning how to work under pressure. That was a big part of my experience at Kearney. It seems like we were always on these difficult projects with tough clients and tough deliverables and not enough time and not enough people. And learning how to get results in that environment was very beneficial to then becoming a COO and a CEO. The thing I didn't learn, or I had to unlearn, was writing slides.
Yeah. Yep.
I was trained after 8 years to write these crazy dense slides with just paragraphs of information. And I got into Johnson & Johnson because I left Kearney for Johnson & Johnson before private equity. And everybody just looked at me like I was crazy because I had these slides with all this information, and they were like, what are you trying to communicate?
I'm trying to eliminate PowerPoint in my company, just as a rule. And it's like impossible. It just can't kill it.
Yeah.
What I took away from my A.T. Kearney experience was, a group of people, a team would form with very little background in the client's field, and we would reach there, tired, jet-lagged sometimes, and within a day, we were all experts, and teaching the client and telling the client what to do and what not to do. That was very empowering.
Piling on your point of things to unlearn in a corporate setting, was something that's very helpful in consulting is being hypothesis-driven, and it really helps us sort of cut through the chase and figure out what analysis to do to prove or disprove your hypothesis. But when I first joined BGI as CFO, I carried on being hypothesis-driven, and I got feedback that everybody thinks I already knew the answers, and then instead of telling me I was wrong, they'd sort of think, well, she's crazy. She thinks this is the right answer, but we better do it.
The other thing is that you assume in consulting that that project you're working on is like what that executive thinks about all day long. But the reason they hired you is because they don't want to think about it all day long, or they don't have time to think about it all day.
As a procurer of consulting services, I couldn't agree with that point more. It's easy to be myopic about the engagement you're working on and forget the big picture that your client is trying to solve.
When I left Kearney after 8 years, I probably didn't realize, I got a bit spoiled with the quality of people that I was working with. And you probably saw this too, Ben.
Yes.
Where you get out, and I went to Johnson & Johnson, an academy company. We had many, many great people, but just the quality wasn't the same to deliver the same results. And then all of a sudden I'm COO or CEO of a private equity-backed $500 million company, and it's just another level. But yet you still have to motivate and get high results from a group, and you don't have the capabilities that you're used to here. So
it was hard for me to get everything that a A.T. Kearney team could do. They were like jack of all trades. So when I'm starting my company, I have to hire someone that's an expert at something and can only do that. And so that has been hard on how to do the crosstalk and how to get them in a room to think about one thing together at that high level.
As a person who has started a couple of companies, and the first one, I hired a bunch of ex-AT Kearneys. It was a disaster because they were too smart. Like when you're starting something, you need a
They
couple
want
of
everything
people
done in 10 days.
who can set the vision and set the direction.
Don't go work
You
there
don't
'cause
need
you're
like
too smart. I can
you don't-
hear it now, Ben.
You can't have too many people who want to be the chief. So there is a
Right.
balance where
Balance
you
between-
need sort of executors. You can't have everybody wanting to be the CEO.
You know, I always joke when I started, I said, oh, you know, me and my mighty team of one. And then it was like me and my mighty team of two, and now I have 3 people. But a lot of the work gets done with the organization. It gets done with our brands. It gets done with the functions, and you don't have the same caliber of talent there. But what I found is, and this is also the good consulting training, is if you structure the problem you're trying to solve for them, and if you give the right level of direction, they can go do, right? So they can't come to something that's completely unstructured and ambiguous and sift through all of that. But if you say, you know, here's what I need you to go figure out, they're actually like really good people deep into the organization that can go figure that bit out for you.
I agree with you that, you know, that people may not have the same scope of experience and talent. I find very talented and smart people that may be more functionally oriented than in terms of the breadth of what they've seen or been exposed to. Just on the opposite side, when you bring ex-consultants in sometime, they're not used to working on narrow areas, whether it be finance function or an operating function or whatever. And so they want to work on corporate-wide, board-level problems, and or maybe have a little sense of entitlement of what they should be available to them in their career. And so that I haven't, you know, in the ex-Kearney people, I think there's a sense of humility in the firm. Because, I spent some time at McKinsey, her old firm, after I left Kearney, and that sense of humility wasn't as pervasive.
I agree with that because I spent 7 years at McKinsey as well, and then joined to come to AT Kearney in '93 as part of the team that started the global financial services practice. And it was one of the most dramatic things that was different about this firm was the down-to-earthness, the sense of humility, and the real passion for, you know, not trying to be the smartest person or have the best answer, but to really help your client. When you've worked with other consulting firms, including AT Kearney, what are the things that have driven you crazy and nuts that they've done wrong, and what are the things that have really surprised you and impressed you that have stood out?
One of our companies is got a Kearney team, kind of a classic Kearney project, and at a different Golden Gate company, we have the competitor doing kind of ops, global sourcing, supply chain type work, and they are quite different. Watching the two side by side execute, and I have, you know, a good view into both. And I would say that some of the stark differences are that other firm is much larger. It's you know, one of these big accounting plays. There's thousands and thousands. They're tied to audit, and as we go through sourcing and as we go through supply chain work, there's a conservativeness to what they want to do and what they're able to do that I don't see from the Kearney team. I find that the Kearney team can be a little bit more aggressive. I also think that there's more variation in terms of the skills and the people that other firm is bringing, versus the Kearney team tends to be pretty focused. Everybody's background is right there. I've actually twice on the other project had to ask the partner, could we remove that particular individual? It's just not working out. I don't see their skill set. I don't want this to be a training exercise for people who have sort of no business doing this kind of work. But I like that firm. I'll sort of plug. I like the fact that I can, in private equity, tying your deliverables to your underwriting and to your lending agreements is very important. And that's the one thing I can't do with Kearney. So I have to take all the Kearney results and get an accounting firm to look at it and bless it.
What I find is the firms that tend to staff smart but junior are just firms where it doesn't work. And they're really, really smart kids, and they can do like really great analytics, and they can crunch to your data, but they have absolutely no connection to the big picture and what the business needs. There's partners, you see them when you're going through the pitch or the kickoff or whatever, and then you barely see them again until steering committees, and it just doesn't bring the same depth of expertise to a problem that's needed before you can connect the dots on the data that you have. And then the other thing tied to that a little bit is when you do get too arrogant as a consultant and you think you really know this, and it really doesn't matter how long you've been doing chirp or whatever it is, your area of focus is, that you have to give credit to the client to some extent, that they've run this business for 15, 20, whatever number of years it is. And if you're not an active listener, then you miss it.
You know, like you said, I mean, some of the partners in other firms show up, sound like they were fully informed and engaged all along, and you ask them 17 questions and they fall apart, or it goes back down, and the quality of the work suffers because the senior people have not been engaged at an operating level.
And one thing A.T. Kearney, I think, really does well and is differentiated, and you don't often see, is being willing to have courageous conversations with the client. So I love it if a partner will come and say to the CEO or even a board director or the appropriate person, this is not really going well, or it's going fine, but we could do so much better if, and we've messed up, or you've messed, you know, let's just look at this now and try and fix it or do something differently before it gets too late. You don't see that very often.
You may not realize, but when these other firms call on you as a client, they always roll out the ex-Kearney person that they think knows you. Yeah. It happened once that they rolled out, they being the competitor, rolled out someone who I remembered, and this particular individual was a partner in Kearney in like 1997. He rejected my expense report. And to this day, I am still pissed off about it. There was no way we were giving them the project.
I will look towards companies that have subject matter expertise, because it's all in the healthcare space and genomics. And I know that there are a few consulting firms that are really investing in biotech subject matter experts and in data scientists and all. So I was really happy to hear that with this recent acquisition with the data scientists at A.T. Kearney.
On that note, so one of the things that's changed in the time period, certainly from when we were all with the firm, is data and technology. I can remember an associate for me building an analysis where he had to go to the library, pull microfiche, and pull PC pricing for the past 4 years. Doug Kilpone I did this, and put it in a spreadsheet. And now you have an explosion of data and technology. What has changed in terms of how you run your business over the last 20 years because of this access to technology and data?
You know, there are legacy companies that sort of grew up before this dramatic change and new technologies and, you know, massive ability to mine data. And then there are the new companies that grew up as natives in that space, and it's a real divide. Most big legacy companies I'm involved with, you know, RBS, Fiserv, et cetera, they really are completely struggling. It's a big opportunity for consulting firms like A.T. Kearney to figure out how to mine data and use data and what data to look at, and they're overwhelmed, whereas the native digital companies, you know, it's what they wouldn't dream of making a decision without appropriate data on everything that's relevant to that decision.
A big opportunity is genomic data. I mean, it's going to surpass every other kind of data, YouTube and everything else. So the act of storing it, accessing it, you know, how do you compress it? How do you make it cheaper? And how do you build a sandbox around it? And you know, people can access this and some others can access that, is a huge opportunity.
With us, there's more and more consumer data everywhere. So if you think about everyone that touches our brands, wherever they touch it, there's data around it, the Instagram posts, and all of it's like very unstructured, right? So it's not something that's neatly tied up in a relational database, which is the data analyst world that I grew up in. But the thing about it is, and I think why the big companies struggle a little bit, is because you're trying to build that on top of legacy infrastructure, and most often you're trying to do it with legacy partners. And I see ourselves falling into this trap too, which is, oh, we want to go, you know, build a one universal consumer database, and let's go do it with Accenture. And it's like, but you almost have to say, you know what, that house is not great. Let's just raise it to the ground and start with a new, like completely new build. The other thing about it, though, that's going to be the big hurdle, I think, for organizations, is the insights are going to come out of a black box. And I think when you think back to, and I think back to all the great analytics we did at Kearney and the presentations we made to clients, there was a logic walk you could take them through. Like you could show them the regressions, you could show them and you could get to the insights of why you were recommending a certain thing. And when you work with this volume of data in this unstructured way, you're going to get an answer. And you're not necessarily going to know why the answer is the answer.
Predicting what is going to happen is also going to be important, because by the time you get that answer, things would have changed outside. at least in the field that I'm in, every day when I get up, I'm scared to read the news because there is one new competitor that's doing something, slightly similar to what we are doing.
I've been in private equity for 12 years. What's changed so much is the internet and the ability to find talented resources, independent consultants, people who at one point in time sat in these chairs, and they're single shingle consultants. You can plug and play them into a problem. Right. We're using them, working with them, I should say, a lot more, and it's a lot easier to find them than it was 12 years ago. 12 years ago, it was if you had a big problem and you couldn't figure it out, you had to go get the consulting firm. Not that there isn't a place for A.T. Kearney, of course there is. I mean, I wouldn't have the project we have right now if there wasn't, but it's changed the landscape. It's changed the landscape such that people can do this on an independent basis much easier, and we can find them much easier.
So the other thing that's sort of we've all gone through and over the last 20 years or whatever is the change in sort of the working environment, whether it's the diversity changes or behavior that might have been acceptable as wrong as it was 25 years ago, not being acceptable today. How have you guys seen that change happen in the industry?
When I think of diversity, it's the diversity of thought that I want in a company. I don't want everyone to agree with me because then I feel like I'm wasting the money on their salaries. I always like people to disagree and offer the other point of view. The point of view is the better the discussion.
I think the tipping point has been reached maybe several years ago on this, the recognition that diverse teams create better value, better outcomes, and reduce risk, actually, than teams that all look and feel the same and have the same background. Now I think there's hardly a company, a leadership team, a board of directors that wouldn't accept that that's the case. So executing on building a diverse company that welcomes everyone to bring their best selves to the table, that's a challenge. But it feels to me, sitting in boardrooms all over the world, that it's now acknowledged that it will hurt your performance, and more importantly, it creates risk for a company that doesn't have a diverse team. You've got blind spots.
I think there's enough information and study that's been done that says the economics are better when you have a diverse workforce in a variety of different capacities. But we're having to use outcome metrics to force the change upstream, right? So we're looking at pay ratios. We're looking, in kind of mix of employees as percent of everything. So it's a classic kind of problem that we're having, couldn't get it done any other way. So people are now examining from a regulatory perspective and an outside-in perspective outcome metrics like, equal pay for every role, percentage of people in leadership roles. We have to report in some countries on all that now. And I think that's just a matter of time before we start reporting on more officially those things in the US. And I think those are creating positive change upstream, but it's a shame that it's kind of taken that kind of a focus at the end to drive the change back into the organizations.
What I find is the biggest barrier to it and actually executing it is when you're in the situation like I was in 2011 with being CEO of US Silica. You become CEO of a $500 million company, and it's like winning the lottery in some sense, because every person who you ever knew who's sort of out there in the working world wants to figure out how they can come in and join you on that. And the temptation as a CEO is to hire a bunch of people you've worked with in the past, right? And I actually, when I became CEO, had a pretty empty management team. The management team left with the former CEO. So I had 8 or 9 positions. And I could have just populated it with 8 or 9 people that I knew from my past. And I made a conscious decision. I said, you know what, going back to your point, there's no way we're going to get diversity of thought if I'm going to hire 9 people I used to work with. I don't even want to hire 1 person I used to work with, because then that person is my favorite. I want all 9 people to be on the same page with me and come in for the same reasons. And I did that. And I think the US Silica IPO speaks for itself. And that whole management team that I put together is exactly still there.
The next level is joy in the workplace. I think that's so exciting that A.T. Kearney is setting that bar. 10 years ago, most companies looked at how we could make money. Now there's really soul digging at big companies to why do we exist? Are we doing something useful? right? Yeah, we might be able to make lots of money, but are we serving a useful purpose? What is the meaningful purpose of our company?
How do you balance that with the need? I mean, because you can say, hey, I want to be a happy, feel-good company, but if your stock drops by half, you got to get a good job.
Perfect example.
Well, I think you take a long-term view, right? You start out doing something that you're passionate about, that you think will fix a problem that you see. And you take the wager that if you fix that problem, there will be money that will come. I get the kick out of changing a big problem that I see. So for me, that would be enough, but I have to pay my people and also.
These days, if you're a company that makes lots of money but isn't doing something important, it's hard to attract talent. It's,
Right. It's hard to keep talent, even if you've attracted them. They're always wanting to do meaningful things, these young people. So you have to give them something meaningful to do. When we were growing up, we just wanted the paycheck. But I think the younger folks really are all about meaning.
You've got a whole generation that cares about what they value as individuals versus, brands or things like that. And so you have to have your company represent that, and so they come work for you and you get great talent, but they're also your consumers, and it is a virtuous circle. And if you don't believe in something, by the way, you can't fake it either. You can't just wake up and say, hey, now I'm going to be about doing good for poor people in Southeast Asia. No, you can't just wake up and be that.
So with that, I know we're going to have some questions from the audience.
What do you wish you had taken advantage of while you were at A.T. Kearney?
What you're doing tomorrow, where you're encouraging people to go and sit in and learn about different industries or practice areas, is a phenomenally good idea. There is some brilliant thinking that can come across industries, across functions.
You have a lot of really talented folks around you, and building those relationships at a meaningful level is something that I think you can easily lose sight of. So it's easy to get caught up on progression or off on the next engagement or whatever your career aspirations are.
I wish I had kept in touch with all those people.
I'm wondering what perspective you guys have gained in industry that has helped you be successful in recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce.
I recruit in the technology industry, and it's not the easiest industry to get a diverse workforce in, especially in some functions. So when we recruit now, there's we always make sure there's a diverse slate of candidates for every role we're recruiting for. It's a way to force the dialogue, and it doesn't dumb down this process, but it may extend it, and we just have to be more patient with some of the recruiting activities, because it's like this: that person's qualified, therefore hire him to move fast. At the same time, you're just going to perpetuate the same thinking, the same problem, the same, you're not going to have a diverse thought.
The best firms I've seen do this have, rolled their sleeves up, done the hard, gritty work, and gone out and grabbed and embraced the high potential future leaders, not just hope that they would still be there and bubble up 5 years from now.
Make the process less about the interview and what you have in common with that person, and actually use case and other methods to give them a problem. I was talking with one of our companies the other day about this. We're hiring a plant manager, and I said, we just got this big consulting report. There's an executive summary to it. Let's hand every single candidate the executive summary and say, what would you do now? And evaluate the candidates based on that. I find that levels the playing field. Otherwise, it's just, I have a lot in common with that individual. We got to hire them. They're a great person.
It's how you use the case method too, because if we use the case method and say, well, did you get the case or did you not get the case, then I think you may fall into the trap of hiring a lot of the same types of people who think about a particular problem in the same type of way, versus using the case method to really see how this person thinks. And then back to Plavi's point, then you bring diversity of thought, because maybe they didn't get all the 5 things you wanted them to get on the case, but they're thinking about it in a slightly different way.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm always trying to hire women, and some men do make it. I think I've been diverse.
How do you sustain talent through the ranks, right? Because when we read about diversity in a lot of different places, it's not that there's not enough diverse talent coming in at lower levels, it's how the diverse talent bubbles up to the CEO, CFO, CPO partner, principal, and all kinds of levels when we think about that?
Getting diversity is not the biggest challenge in my business. When you're in beauty, it's very, very diverse culturally, backgrounds. 70% of our leadership team is women. So for the first time, I'm always in a room and I'm the minority. LGBT, like Lord knows all of our makeup artists are gay. I mean, it's not the hardest thing to attract the talent. But you raise a very good point, because despite the fact that we have, I want to say, at least 60% of our organization in the Americas, and I can only speak to our region, is women. It is a real challenge to then, even within that environment, develop and build and retain this talent. And what our company is doing is exactly what Allison said, is it's got to start from the top down, right? So there may be an associate marketer or an analyst or somebody in finance, and they need to know that there is a role for them in the organization, the bigger organization. There's a career path for them, and there is a connection that they have with leadership. And it's, it's not just our leadership team, but it's, our direct reports and probably a level below. But having that connection to feel like they're part of something and they want to continue to be part of something. And I think all too often, like when you do it by committees and you do it by metrics, you kind of go down and you're like, oh, well, we grew women 24% this year, check, and you lose sight of that's not what people are there for. They're not there to look around the room and see 20 other people like them. They're there to make a connection with those individuals.
And well, that plays into the fact that we have to face up to the fact that women do go through certain things as having kids. Since last time I checked, the women gave birth to the whole entire world. So I think they do need to take a few. They need to take a few breaks, and they need some flexibility. So I think they have to feel it. It's not about what the company is doing. They have to feel that it's understood. It's not something that's hidden and it's in the background.
There's a very practical set of things you have to do too. You have to have policies that encourage whether it's maternity leave or paternity leave for that matter. I mean,
yes, I think that has to be permanent. Paternity leave has to be taken because that levels the playing field.
But making that real and not hurting their career progression is where it gets trickier. So there's all I'm saying is you've got to be very intentional about these things. You can't just assume it's going to happen.
Right.
From my experience, a lot of companies have the policies, but what they don't realize is when the club at the top is all, it's like a rugby team, right? The people who don't like rugby and don't want to be on a rugby team, they're sort of like, it's not exciting, or I don't, that's not fun. I don't want to dress up and roll in the mud in the cold. So I'll go and do another great job somewhere else. So the rugby team has to realize it has to open itself up and make it appealing and joyful for diverse people to come and be part of that team at the top. So I'm talking about the top two layers, which tend to be less diverse. Every company struggles with that. They, most have very diverse workforce, very diverse customers, but they just are all struggling to get the top team to be more diverse.
Well, the good news is
people opt out and don't find it. So they're not raising their hands saying, please let me join your rugby club and come and roll in the mud in the cold with you all, So.
The good news, at least the boards I'm on, and I'm sure the boards you're on, this is a topic at the board level now. So it's not, at least getting a light shined on it, which will help.
I think a lot of people in this room, one of our most common stories or discussions we have is, I have to travel so much and I'm traveling all the time and it's so hard, and work-life balance. And there's the assumption that it's so much easier on the corporate side, the work-life balance and the lack of travel. Right, and so obviously I'm still here after all these years, so I found that it's doable for me. But I'm wondering if you could give a perspective on, is it really so much easier on the other side?
There are roles out there post-consulting where you'll travel less, you'll work less hours. It's a trade-off. I chose to kind of stay that path. My first job at Johnson & Johnson, I had 80 professionals managing $1 billion supply chain, and they were spread across the world. So It was conference calls at all hours and travel 4 or 5 days a week. I remember it got so bad once that the president of skincare, the woman said to myself and another person actually at a board meeting after a couple of years of it, and I was so used to working 24/7 because of my Kearney days, she said, you know, I'm going to put a rule in that the two of you, because I was sitting next to Guy, another gentleman who sort of had a similar work style, I'm going to put a rule in now that the two of you are no longer allowed to send emails on weekends because you're just harassing everybody. You're the only two people that work all weekend. And I think that's when I realized I maybe had a problem. So Guy and I said, okay, you're the boss. We'll stop emailing on the weekend, but we'd still work all weekend. And
Just emailed each other.
Yeah. We could email each other.
Started
We
texting.
couldn't email anybody else in Johnson & Johnson. So what happened was that lasted for about 3 months, and then the two of us would shoot all our emails off on Monday morning at 9 o'clock at J&J starting time. And about 3 months later, Sharon comes into the board. She's like, I got another complaint about you two guys. You stress everybody out on Monday mornings. You got to stop sending emails on Monday mornings. So, you just realize that if you choose that path.
There are things a company can do, right? So we have a very robust work from home and remote work policy where we use video like it's like it's a religion. We use Zoom for almost every meeting, and so we don't force as much travel but we do expect participation, and we want people to participate visually wherever possible because we think that adds something to the behavior or the accomplishment of the meeting. So you can do things in the company to facilitate the amount of road warriorness, if you will, that are accommodate people with different objectives.
I've worked with a lot of very successful CEOs of global companies, and some of them are completely manic, setting a tone at the top that you're always on the move, and everyone is, and everyone
True.
works all the time. And as a result, thousands and tens of thousands of people's lives is turned up by that. And there are very successful CEOs who are more calm and are incredibly effective during the course of a year, because what do you need to do as CEO? Put a good team in place, build a vision, make sure it gets executed. And they don't run around like crazy people, and they are home for family dinner. And they build a company that is more calm, less manic, less crazy. So I think everyone needs to own their own, sense of joy and effectiveness. And people just get scared, like, oh, if I don't come in on Sunday, my boss will be upset with me. Well, maybe that he will be, but if you do a great job during the course of a year and the company fires you, well, then there'll be another company, if you're doing a great job, that would love to have you. So I think we should all own our own. Sometimes it takes courageous actions or courageous decisions.
And there's nothing easy out there, right? You're either going to take risk, you're going to work hard, or somehow you're magically a genius, which I'm not. And I've had a lot of people come out of consulting in my career who are like, oh, I want to take it easy, I'm going to go work at YouTube. And I'm like, do you think those people don't work? It's a hard, there's a lot of challenge there. The balance is a different issue. I've had an office 3 blocks from my house for 4 years. That was awesome. But there's a difference between not traveling and that doesn't mean you're not thinking about it 24 hours a day. And when you're in the operating world, and those people you're laying off are your people. If you don't meet the quota, those are your people. And it's a completely different experience than what you experience in the consulting world, where you can do that report. There's a page at the end with 2,375 people who are getting laid off, and you're like, oh, let's go have a beer. Those are your people. It's a very different situation as an operator.
I think you have to ask yourself, what are the things you want to trade off? Because what you've heard here, clearly, and we can all talk about our experiences, there is no one experience on the other side. They're all very, very different, and it depends on what you choose to do. And yes, there's probably a lazy river versus the rapid level 5, but you don't want to be on a lazy river. If you wanted to be on a lazy river, you wouldn't be at AT Kearney, right? So you have to decide what are the things you trade off. And so if travel is the big thing you want to trade off, then you have to find that opportunity that trades that off. Because what I will say is that you don't appreciate this until you leave, but consulting actually gives you a lot of flexibility in some ways. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it does give you flexibility that sometimes the corporate world does not afford, and it's just something to think about, whether that's in between engagements and even while you're on an engagement, like Friday afternoons you alluded to. I mean, there's pockets of things that you can work with. So
thank you, and I think what thank you. What I want to encourage everybody in the audience to do is that this conversation is exactly what you can have on your own instead of sitting in your room watching Netflix at night when you're on the road. There are alumni all over this globe, in any city, even San Antonio. There are alumni everywhere, and take the time to reach out and have these kind of conversations with them versus watching Netflix or whatever you do at night, working on a new deck. So thank you.